Hi everybody, it's Chris, and welcome to another video by the Infinity System. This time around, let's talk about Moon Knight, Episode 1. We've watched it, and now we're going to bring our thoughts to you. Just how accurate was the representation of D.I.D. in our character, Mark Spector? Clocking in at just under 36 minutes, the first episode of Moon Knight focuses on Stephen Grant. Except from what we've seen so far, this is no millionaire playboy, but merely an average and extremely confused clerk at a local museum. But let's dive into the details. For the series, we've decided to, in appropriate fashion, judge the episodes individually and then the mini-series as a whole, by creating a representation of the weighing of the soul as depicted in the ancient Egyptian Book of the Dead. In ancient Egyptian mythology, the newly dead person is brought before Anubis, who weighs the heart of the deceased against the feather of truth. For each evil action, the heart of the accused grows heavier, and conversely, for each good or truthful action taken during their life, the feather will sink accordingly. After everything has been weighed, the balance is determined. If the feather carries more weight, then the deceased is allowed to move on to their eternal life in paradise. But if the heart is heavier than the feather, the deceased is then devoured by Amut, a fearsome goddess made up of equal parts crocodile, leopard, and hippo. Now, as we watched the first episode, we kept track of how well Marvel did by dividing our analysis like this. For each accurate, or at least tolerable, depiction of D.I.D., we awarded one feather of truth, and for each misleading or violent instance, we award one human heart. After everything is tallied, we'll see where each episode and the series accurately, or semi-accurately, depicts D.I.D. So let's get started. 2 minutes in, and we've already seen our first incident of self-harm. However, it's actually the villain who is putting glass in his shoes. But still, we start off with a self-harm depiction, not a roaring start. At 3 minutes in, our hero Stephen wakes up chained to his bed. We notice that he has also surrounded his bed with sand in order to detect any footprints, and sealed his door with a strip of blue tape. Obviously, these are things that he has used to stop alters, or possibly to detect the fact that they are coming out when he's not there. Although at this point, we don't know if he actually thinks that he has D.I.D., so this could just be a depiction of a man trying to grapple desperately with unexplained behavior in his life, which actually is pretty similar to how D.I.D. actually works. So we're going to award one feather of truth. So, at the 5.5 minute mark, we have Stephen pointedly putting on his name tag, showing his name, even though he seems to be a bit confused about it. We'll award this instance with another feather of truth. At 6 minutes in, we have the first, what the hell? I didn't say that. What are you talking about? When Stephen seems to have made a date with the beautiful young lady here. So, we'll go ahead and give that another feather of truth. At the 8 minute mark, a security guard in the museum calls him by the name of Scott, and despite telling him and correcting him that his name is Steve, the security guard more or less nods his head and says, "Okay, Scott, we're going to go ahead and award this a feather of truth for authenticity, because this can often happen." At the 9 minute mark, we essentially have a description of his night wanderings and waking up in other places without knowing how he got there. We'll go ahead and award this another feather of truth for at least accurate representation of the time losses that D.I.D. systems experience. Around the 11 minute mark, this scenario exactly happens, and Steve wakes up on a mountainside near a castle without any idea how he got there, and neither do we. So we're going to award this another feather of truth, but also a misrepresentation for a depiction of violence. At the 12 minute mark, Steve hears a denigrating voice from the interior asking him to relinquish the body and calling him an idiot. We're going to go ahead and put this down for one of all 3 counts, because while it is accurate to hear a voice coming from inside, an alter speaking to you, in this case they're rather misrepresenting it and tuning into the violent aspect of it, the evil alter. So we'll award 1 point for authenticity, 1 feather of truth, and 2 points in the human heart, 1 for misrepresentation, and 1 for violence. At the 16-minute mark, we have a depiction of the alter taking direct control of the body, causing a sudden blackout. We are again going to award 1 point to each category, a feather of truth and 2 human hearts, for showing again violent or misleading representations coupled with what is actual hard switching. At the 18-minute mark, we have our hero awakening in the middle of a circle of dead bodies covered in their blood. The internal voice again chastises him and calls him an idiot for being at the front. Is this the action of a persecutor? And the chase ensues in, of all things, a cupcake truck. So again, we're going to give 1 mark to each of the 3 categories. Violent showing of misleading information, but an accurate showing of switching, and particularly no-con switching, along with the voice of a persecutor. At the 20-minute mark, we have our hero reawakening or refronting from a non-co switch, coming to, still driving the van, covered in more blood and with a dead guy in the back, once again reinforcing in a matter of minutes the dangerous or hostile natures of persecutors and other alters. We're going to go ahead and award this scene again 1 point in each category, 2 human hearts for the violent misrepresentation of D.I.D, and 1 accurate for showing non-conco switches and just how confusing it can be. At the 21-minute mark, our alter threatens Stephen directly, claiming that he will kill them both if the scarab in the possession is lost to the bad guys. We're going to go ahead and award again 1 point to each category, 2 human hearts for violent misrepresentation of alter behavior, and 1 accurate or semi-accurate award, 1 feather of truth for at least touching on sometimes the more violent and self-harming nature that persecutors can portray. At the 22-minute mark, we have yet another blackout caused by non-co switching, yet more men killed, and more insults from the persecutor alter before our hero wakes up back in bed with his ankle chained as he was in the beginning of the show. So again, we have to award 1 point to each category, 2 human hearts for violent misrepresentations of alters, and 1 feather of truth for actually showing what a non-co blackout can be, and again, how scary it can be, even if they're dramatizing it severely. At the 23-minute mark into the episode, we have our hero visiting the pet store where he bought his goldfish one, puzzled that, in fact, the fish that he had previously had with 1 fin now has 2, and the shop clerk informs him that he was in yesterday to purchase a new fish. We're going to go ahead and give this one on Feather of Truth for an accurate depiction of the kind of scary time jumps that you can have and how your circumstances and environments may change. At the 24-minute mark in, we have our hero calling his date, puzzled that she has not come to the steak restaurant in order to have their date. She informs him quite acidly that, in fact, that date was 2 days ago, and he's puzzled again to discover that somehow he has lost a large chunk of time without being aware of it. We're going to go ahead and again give this 1 feather of truth for an accurate depiction of the confusion that comes with lost time. At the 26-minute mark, back in his apartment, our hero discovers a secret area in the apartment which contains a cell phone, etc., which obviously belongs to his other alters or someone else entirely. At the 29-minute mark, we see a depiction of audio hallucinations after he calls a girl on the cell phone that he found. We're going to go ahead and award this a feather of truth because we experience pronounced audio hallucinations all the time and feel that this is an accurate depiction of that experience. At the 30-minute mark, our hero Stephen sees his alter in the mirror and in reflections. Now, this is not exactly accurate to our experience of D.I.D., but it's definitely a Hollywood nod to the mirror aversion that many trauma and CSA victims will feel. We don't like to look at ourselves in the mirror because we were told that we weren't really persons. So we're going to go ahead and award this instance 1 human heart for being slightly misleading, but also presenting an accurate depiction of how mirrors can be aversion for many D.I.D. sufferers. At the 31-minute mark, we have a depiction of visual hallucinations where our hero hallucinates seeing Khonshu in the reflections of the elevator. This continues on where he blacks out and suddenly wakes up on a bus, where again he hallucinates Khonshu. We're going to go ahead and award each of these depictions one feather of truth for accurately portraying visual hallucinations and how they can affect you, and also, again, a realistic blackout where our character wakes up, not where he remembers last being. At the 37-minute mark, the bad guy detects chaos in Stephen after weighing him with the stick of Amut, that is obviously their version of the scales of balance, to get into the other world. However, as we've covered previously in this episode, it's Anubis that actually does the weighing, and Amut is the one that eats the evil heart. So we have a misrepresentation of ancient Egyptian mythology and a slight misrepresentation of the internal struggle with altars, but at least we have a recognition of it. So we're going to balance this one out with one heart for the misrepresentation, since that's a little bit stronger here than the actual accurate depiction of the chaos that comes around with D.I.D. That brings us to the 38-minute mark, where our hero is having audio hallucinations, possibly of dog or Anubis-like things. Really? This is how we portray Anubis, as an undignified, animalistic, vicious attack machine. Facepalm. So for this instance, we have to award one feather of truth for cluing in on the fact that audio hallucinations can cause great fear and disruption. Is he really experiencing these Anubis things, or is it just all in his head? That brings us to the 39-minute mark, where we have our hero visualizing or hallucinating his alter in a mirror, who is then asking for direct control of the body, stating that while Stephen cannot save them from the hideous Anubis attack dogs, that he can. This sets up the conflict within Stephen of needing to save his life versus the fear of letting go of control of the front and slipping into blackness. We're going to go ahead and award this one feather of truth for an accurate depiction of the internal conflict and fear that can come along with being willing to be non-co with your alters. This takes us straight into the 41 to 42-minute mark, wherein the altar takes control, turns into Moon Knight, and promptly slaughters the Anubis attack dog abomination things. We're going to go ahead and award this 2 human hearts for, again, the violent misrepresentation of an altar as a attack evil being only committed to violence, even though in this case it actually does serve to save the body. And last, at the 45-minute mark, only then does Marvel do the right thing and give a link to NAMI.org at the end, after literally everything but the Marvel logo, which is the very last thing that is shown. So let's go ahead and tally those things up. We'll go ahead and count the feathers of truth versus the human hearts and see where the scale lies. So, after tallying things up, we find 22 instances of misrepresentation or violent depictions of D.I.D. and 22 instances of at least semi-accurate depictions of the symptoms of D.I.D., which effectively balance the scales of judgment on Moon Knight as an even mix, at least for the first episode. We'll see later on if the scales shift in the favor of Marvel getting it right, or if they're, metaphorically at least, throwing the D.I.D. community into the tender embrace of Amut and relegating us once again to a depiction of violent boogeymen. That's it for this time, guys. We'll see you next time around when we review Episode 2, whether or not those scales are going to tilt in our favor. In the meantime, be sure to drop your thoughts on Episode 1 or the Moon Knight franchise or the representation or misrepresentation of D.I.D. in the comments below. And as always, we'd like to remind you that you are loved, that you are strong, and that you are not alone. I'm Chris. Thanks for watching.